last time I seen my dad was on Halloween 2009. He stopped answering my calls probably about 6:30 on Halloween night. Halloween that year fell on a Saturday. I started looking for him Sunday. I drove around Monday, all through the country outside Spartansburg, Union City, and Bartonia. And then on Tuesday, his friend called me from the corner of Elm by the library and said that he'd found Dad's van. And I said, well, is Dad in it? He said, I haven't went to it. And I rushed up there. When I got to the van, I went up on the driver's side. And when I looked in, I could see my dad laying on the floor in the back seat. I was screaming, my dad's dead. Someone's killed him.
Our dispatch center on November 3rd, around 5 o'clock, received a 911 call. And it was from Janice Cheadle that she had found her father. Patrick Cheadle was deceased in the back of a van.
Crime scene investigators, they're looking for cigarette butts, a soda can, anything that may have DNA to where they can then pinpoint potential suspects.
In this day and age, DNA, fibers, everything else, it's down to the minute, so we wanted to limit the amount of people within the actual scene. He was in the back of the van. There was a lot of blood in the hair and face, so we knew that it was a head wound. You can easily conclude someone usually doesn't die in that manner in the back of a vehicle. We knew we had a homicide.
Detectives are finding a few things that raise questions. There's no blood splatter inside of that van. Because of that, they know that this body has been moved from a place where this man was killed into the van and then parked in this area.
We processed the van. We took evidence. One of the bits of evidence was a cell phone that Mr. Cheadle had on his person. There was a significant amount of cash found.
Patrick Cheadle had $3,000 cash on him when they found his body. Apparently, he was supposed to go buy a car that evening that he went missing.
There was also some marijuana found in the back of the van. And eventually, we removed the body from the van and took it to the coroner's office. The autopsy determined it was probable that he died from a gunshot wound to the head, and that he was shot at fairly close range. Then he had abrasions of limestone, as if he had been drugged. And limestone is what your gravel driveways and a lot of your concrete is made of. They also saw inside his collar was dried vegetation. And we called in a botanist, and he identified it as a plantain weed. Very common, but the botanist said wherever he was drugged, this plant will be present.
It is bizarre. You have a murder on Halloween. The body being found on Elm Street, is there a connection to Halloween? Nobody knows. In 2009, Greenville, Ohio has a population of less than 13,000 people. This is not an ordinary situation for the people who live in a small community like this. They are scared.
We're the type of community where people still wave to you. So it's very small town, the charm is there. Greenville's very large, older homes, nice homes. Once you leave Greenville, it's vast farmland, so we are very rural. 1997 was the last homicide we had before this one.
People in Greenville, Ohio are terrified. So investigators need to find the person who did this, and you got to find them quickly. Obviously, the next step for detectives is questioning family members, trying to get leads to figure out what was going on right before Pat Cheadle was killed.
Janice Cheadle, the daughter of Patrick, made the phone call and made the discovery. She was in shock. She agreed to speak to me, though.
On Halloween, 2009, at approximately noon, I went over to see him at his friend's shop. He was talking about going to Spartansburg to buy a used car. And then I said, I'll see you later tonight. You're going to go to my sister's Halloween party, aren't you? Yeah, I'll see you later, you know. Hugged him, kissed him, told him I loved him, and that was it. My dad stopped answering my calls probably about 6:30 on Halloween night. My dad never showed up to the party. And then Sunday morning, I went to meet him, and he wasn't there. He hadn't answered me, which I thought was odd. It's not like my dad not to answer my calls or texts. Even if he was busy doing something, he would text me, say, busy, call you later. And I didn't get anything from him for days. I called his friend, and his friend hadn't heard from him either. I called my stepbrother. I called every jail and hospital in a 3-state radius just in case. I honestly just knew something bad happened because my gut told me, and with him not responding to me, I knew it was bad. We just started searching. And my dad's friends just happened to be coming back from Union City, and they took Elm Street and happened upon Dad's van. I just remember yelling and screaming and crying. And I was in the middle of the road and had to be picked up. It literally feels like your heart's been ripped out of your chest. I would describe my dad as a hippie. He was an old soul. He just was one of those relaxed, calm, cool, collective person most of the time.
He worked on trucks at a truck stop here nearby as a detailer.
That was like a hobby and a moneymaker for him. He took pride in his work. He would be polishing his trucks. He would listen to his classic rock, like the Lynyrd Skynyrd and ZZ Top. He was definitely from that era, and it stuck with him. He loved his classic rock. He was a truck driver for about 40 years, so he really wasn't home a lot. He was on the road probably 50 out of the 52 weeks. So when he was home, it was all about his family. He personally only had 2 kids, me and my sister. But when we were younger, he remarried, and we had 3 stepbrothers and a stepsister. My dad definitely was a family man. His mother meant everything to him. He was at his mom's at least once or twice a day, checking on her, or eating with her or something.
While investigators are talking to Patrick's mother, they find out there have been some threats that have come from Patrick's girlfriend's ex-husband.
It seemed that the ex-husband was clearly jealous of Pat and his relationship with his ex-wife.
My dad had a girlfriend for several years. But the ex-husband and the girlfriend weren't actually divorced at the time, they were separated, so there was anger. The ex-husband had told my dad to stay away from his wife. Otherwise, there's going to be trouble. He'd said it multiple times.
It was a fairly recent threat.
Cheadle's mom said, find this person, he probably knows something.
In her eyes, that was the person responsible for the death of her son.
We all know what Halloween's like. Kids going out, trick-or-treating, fake horror for everybody, haunted houses.
In Greenville, we have a Halloween parade, and the businesses will hand out candy, and the fire department's there. Very charming type stuff.
But this was something that really happened on Halloween on Elm Street, of all places, in Greenville, Ohio. Patrick Cheadle had been dead in a vehicle for days. And you had Cheadle's girlfriend's ex-husband telling Cheadle to stop messing with his ex.
We brought in Pat's girlfriend for an interview to see what she knew. We asked about who may have wanted to harm Patrick. She said her ex-husband, that's who she felt may have been responsible for Pat's death. Our next step was we brought in the ex-husband for an interview. He voluntarily came in. He admitted to having issues with Pat. Of course, he had a different story than what other people said. You know, he made it more of a two-way argument instead of just a one-way, but he had no qualms of saying that there were issues between the two. I don't think he showed any remorse on the death, but he did not show any indications that he was involved in the death. In the interview, he told us where he was at during Halloween, and his alibi did check out. The ex-husband was ruled out as a suspect.
Living in a small town, there was a lot of talk and speculation.
Every time there is a homicide anywhere, there are always rumors. Was this a robbery? Was this a drug deal? Was this somebody else who would have a reason to kill this man? And those are the questions that detectives immediately start to ask family members and his daughter, who was on the scene and made that 911 call.
I told Detective Roberts about how my dad was planning on going to buy a car the night before, and told him that the used car was actually a code for him going to buy marijuana, because they needed to know the truth so they could figure out what really happened to my father. My dad had approximately $13,000 on him to buy the car. He had it in a money bag, like a bank money bag. That's how he carried all his money.
She advised that he was going to have about $13,000, but we only found $3,000 on him. And then to find $3,000 cash on a robbery victim, yeah, it was confusing. We thought, well, maybe it wasn't going to be a robbery.
But then detectives get to see cell phone records.
The gold nugget we got was the cell phone. Because your phone tells a story. Tells you where you've been, who you've been in contact with.
Investigators find 3 calls on Halloween. A very important date because this is the last time anybody has seen Cheadle alive. 1 call comes from a landline, 2 other calls come from a cell phone.
The cell phone number traced back to a 19-year-old by the name of David Meisner, which was a little unusual that, Pat was 53 at the time and he was in contact with a 19-year-old.
The landline phone calls came from Bartonia, Indiana, across the state line about 20 minutes away. And they have to get the Randolph County Sheriff's Office involved too, as they go there and start investigating in that small little township of Bartonia.
The Greenville Police Department, Chief Roberts, he reached out to me, told me that they had went through some cell phone records.
And I just basically lay out everything we have, and then the names that we're giving, he knew them. Adam and Marcia Hargrove. They were definitely a person of interest. So we made a trip out there to the Hargrove house.
Investigators are really cautious when they're going to this home. The Randolph County Sheriff's Department has had run-ins with the people who lived there in the past.
I was familiar with the address. Even as a patrol officer, I had been there numerous times for domestic-related situations.
There has been some criminal activity involved with these folks, so they're just cautious. They don't want to do anything to cause any alarm. They don't want to do anything to put themselves in danger either.
It was very rural, very remote area, long lane. It was a husband, wife, and I believe a couple kids. It was oddly calm.
We went to the residence and spoke with the homeowners there. They were confused as to who Patrick Cheadle was. They weren't familiar with the green van. They weren't familiar with any of the questions that we were asking. But they consented to a search. So we basically started looking for any potential types of evidence there at the house that would indicate that that might have been where the crime occurred. Inside the house, there was a fireplace that had burned latex of some sort, and we believed that it might have been rubber gloves. Obviously odd, you don't see that a lot in somebody's fireplace in their home.
Investigators also find plantain, which matches the vegetation that was on Cheadle's shirt found at the coroner's office.
I would say within an hour or two, we had the actual search warrant and a crime tech from the Indiana State Police to use luminol. If sprayed onto a surface that has had blood on it, it will make it illuminate. When he sprayed it on the wooden deck at that property, you could physically see where the shooting occurred and then where a person had been drugged off of the porch. We knew we had our crime scene at that point. We decided to go ahead and take the deck apart. And as soon as we got the boards lifted up, we found a large pooling of blood. The crime scene tech gets a sample of that blood. And then once they did those tests, it was confirmed that it was Patrick Cheadle's blood.
Investigators have their crime scene now. It's on this couple's back porch. Obviously, they think these two people who live in this home are somehow involved. But the couple is adamant that they are not involved in Cheadle's murder at all.
Adam and Marcia said that on Halloween, during the time frame of the homicide, they were at a hospital in Indiana.
Detectives want to know how this blood splatter ended up on their back porch. Why is there a crime scene back there? And they don't know, could this couple be murderers? But investigators had no idea what was going to happen next, and it was a lot worse than they could have ever imagined.
Adam and Marcia said that during the time frame of the homicide, they were not home.
The couple is adamant that they had nothing to do with Cheadle's murder. They don't know how this blood splatter ended up on their back porch.
And their alibi was verified. Everything checked out. They did go visit a hospital in Indiana.
However, they then let investigators know that somebody had been staying in their house while he was having some trouble with his family.
The homeowner said that his cousin, Terry Durbin, had access to the house, and it was on again, off again, staying there.
The night that they came back home from Indianapolis, they found that Terry Durbin was there with a 19-year-old kid. The homeowners said that the 19-year-old was drinking beer and smoking marijuana.
This 19-year-old kid was David Meisner. And Meisner had called the cell phone that Mr. Cheadle had on his person. So things started coming together pretty quick.
The couple did tell us that Terry had left and was going to visit his brother up in Georgia. But prior to him leaving, they noted that he gave them some cash and that he got some repairs done to his vehicle. And they found it kind of odd because he had been kind of on hard times and did not have a lot of money, and suddenly he's got a lot of cash on him.
At that point, our focus turned to learning as much as we could about the cousin, Terry Durbin.
When investigators learned the name Terry Durbin, Durbin happens to be someone who knows Cheadle's stepson.
Terry Durbin and my stepbrother Derek grew up together in the same little town. So that's how my dad met Terry Durbin, was through my stepbrother.
Investigators start doing some background digging into him, and they find he sells pot and he has a violent temper.
One of our local police departments had told us that he was a suspect in the home invasion. They also indicated that he was a suspect in a bank robbery that had occurred in South Bend. Terry is a bad guy.
The investigators understand that there is this murderer going through their community, hiding somewhere, and potentially could strike again. While investigators are digging into Durbin's background, some people let them know there was a double murder in a small town called Mongo, about 2 hours north in Indiana.
I would describe my dad. He was a pretty boisterous guy. Very warm, very caring, very giving.
Terry Anderson and I ran around together and had a lot of fun. We liked fish and hunt and stuff like that.
Darlene, my stepmother, she was like a little butterfly. She was very soft-spoken. She had a really warm heart. My dad and Darlene had one child together, and that was Amanda Anderson. My dad worked for a tree service company. After Katrina, he decided to go down south to help with clearing out some of the trees and the damage. And he definitely was able to earn and save quite a bit of money.
He was working on having a side business and being a muskie tour guide. You know, and he says, I'm just gonna take $10,000 cash and I'm gonna get a brand new boat, but 2 feet longer.
And he did tell people that he had quite a bit of money to buy this boat. Maybe he could talk a little bit too much. The phone call came when I was at work that Darlene had been shot and is dead in the house, and they can't find Dad. When we got to Mongo, a detective came and started handing me personal items of my dad's. That's when he told me that my dad was found in the barn and he was deceased. And they said that they were murdered. It was violent. When you find out that a family member dies, it's hard just knowing that they're not here anymore. But for it to sink in that they were taken, violently taken, it has a different tone.
They didn't tell me where Terry was murdered. I found this out when we started walking onto the other side of the pole barn. This huge, huge round circumference of blood, thick, and Terry Anderson's hat was laying right there in this pool of blood. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Terry and Darlene were brutally beat. Terry's throat was cut.
And you can see the blood on the lawnmower and the blood on the ceiling. Looked like somebody did that. You know, the blood was wall to wall. Little pieces of scalp and stuff. And you can see where he put his handprint on the mower.
I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, this is where he was murdered? And they're like, yeah, you know. And I go, this is not good. I can't have my wife see this stuff. They said, I mean, we can have a cleanup service come in and clean it up. And I said, well, when will that happen? I don't know, maybe a couple of days, the investigator said. And I says, oh, I can't have Sherry see her dad here. Well, the investigator says, well, you can clean them up.
From my perspective, this case was poorly investigated. Investigators turned the crime scene over to the family immediately after only hours. They tell the family members that they can clean it up. Family members are panicked. They don't know what to do. So they start taking everything out of this house that has blood on it. They take out the carpet and burn all of this evidence, unknowingly thinking that investigators have everything they need. And there is a murderer on the loose, ready to strike again.
Terry Durbin worked at the tree trimming service with my dad. They worked quite closely. I met him on a few occasions.
He was a laborer and, you know, kind of an aid and assist. Putting brush or anything into the shredder, whatever it takes to get the job done. My father-in-law and I would be out in the barn. And a couple occasions, you know, Terry Durbin showed up just to talk.
If Durbin was indeed involved in those Mongo murders, as he is suspected to have been, it also appears that he didn't like to operate alone.
Terry Anderson's daughter, Amanda, you know, she had a meth addiction, I guess you could say, knowing to do meth, hanging around with meth friends, hanging out with Terry Durbin as well.
There is lots of speculation from family members and detectives as well that Amanda had a role in the death of her parents.
I suspected a possibility of my sister or her circle of friends. There was a lot of behaviors that I questioned about my sister. And the lack of trying to find out who murdered our father and her mother.
maybe it wasn't something where she expected them to be killed, but there was an incentive for her to get that money that her parents and her father in particular had just come up with.
My sister's possible involvement affected me very deep, and it still bothers me. It still hurts me just to thought.
This case had been cold already for 4 years before Terry Durbin's name comes up again in this murder of Patrick Cheadle. As it turns out, the two cases had quite a few similarities. From what I've gathered about Terry Durbin, everything's about money. And that's where these two cases really collide. Both of these men had cash on hand in their pockets. Both of these men were talking about the money that they had in their pockets.
My dad had lent Terry Durbin money, and I believe Terry Durbin had given my dad a check, and I don't think the check was a good check. And my dad had had a hard time and was angry with Terry Durbin with this loan.
We were told he was more than likely the person who committed the crimes in the Mongo murders.
When a crime occurs in a small community like that, the word spreads fast and people were scared.
I was hearing a bunch of rumors about Terry Durbin. The rumors on the street were about people he'd beat up and almost beat to death, who wouldn't ever testify or tell the cops who did it. I honestly was quite scared after this. I never had a gun in my house. I had a handgun that I slept with under my pillow because it was very scary.
People are terrified that there is a murderer on the loose in their community.
We knew we had a very bad guy, and we wanted to find these two people before someone else was going to get killed.
We didn't sleep. We'd get a couple hours and start out early in the morning. You know, we had the sheriff's office involved, and then we had Randolph County involved. Everybody worked for a common goal. We got the numbers, and we were able to track their cell phones, and we knew that Terry Durbin was going to Georgia. And Mr. Meisner, we pinged him up in Chicago. I made contact with David, and I called him. I introduced myself. I could tell that he was nervous. We then talked about the fact that he showed concern because Mr. Durbin wanted to meet him. And I kept telling him, do not meet him, because looking at the dynamics of the two, you could tell who was probably the leader and who was the follower. And I explained, if you meet with him, he's going to get rid of loose ends.
Investigators know Terry Durbin could strike again. It was just a matter of time.
I was very focused on getting those two in. We had a 53-year-old guy who we strongly believe was involved in another double homicides, who is experienced in the world of crime, and we had a 19-year-old kid who was foolish enough to follow the lead of Terry Durbin.
We decided to just call Terry Durbin and David Meisner, just call them initially to see if they would cooperate and come back and speak with us. And shockingly, both agreed to return. However, Terry said that he needed to take care of some personal business before he would return.
David Meisner's mother had already got him an attorney, and he had X amount of time to turn himself in, or I told him that, we would start looking for him, and that would not be good. In my thought process, Mr. Durbin wanted to meet Mr. Meisner to kill Meisner. And I think he knew that. I think he figured that out. He was scared. So he did come in. Meisner was ready to talk.
He looked like a scared kid to me. He told us they had set up a drug deal. They were selling 3 pounds of marijuana, and the asking price was $9,000 to $10,000.
He was chosen, which with the similarities with Mongo comes because he was going to have cash on hand. Pat was there to buy $10,000 worth of marijuana that did not exist. Instead of it being a marijuana purchase, it was a robbery, and the robbery turned into a homicide.
David Meisner did not know the person personally who was coming, and he said that when he arrived, there was a green van that came down the driveway, and that Terry Durbin had went to answer the door. While Terry was outside, he hears a pop that he recognizes as a gunshot. He told us that Terry came back in the house pointing the gun at him, telling him to come help him where he was next. He told us that Terry Durbin then used a hose to clean blood off the deck.
They drugged the body to the van. Durbin drove the van with Patrick Cheadle in the back. Mr. Meisner was behind him. They dumped him off at Elm Street. And then they drove back to the residence. And later on, that's when the homeowners did come home, and he found that they were drinking.
David Meisner also told us that prior to him and Terry separating ways, Terry gave him $2,000 in cash. David Meisner also did tell us that he purchased the gun, and he told us that he didn't know a murder was going to occur. I mean, he thought it was going to be a robbery.
Investigators now have what they believe is enough evidence to arrest both Meisner and Durbin.
Shortly after, we were contacted by Terry Durbin's attorney, and the attorney made it clear to us that he had talked to his client and he did not wish to talk with law enforcement. We explained to him we were taking him into custody, and we still had enough reason to believe that he was involved in the murder.
On November 12, 2009, 2 weeks after the murder of Patrick Cheadle, Terry Durbin is finally arrested and charged with his murder. David Meisner, also arrested, also charged in the murder of Patrick Cheadle. David Meisner cooperated with investigators, cooperated with the prosecution, and he was treated as a friendly witness. He still got charged with murder. He still got charged with robbery. However, the prosecution and the state made a deal, sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Durbin denied everything, claimed he was completely innocent. The trial was in 2010. All of Cheadle's family was there. They brought in a slew of character witnesses describing Terry Durbin's behavior, his temper. On October 29th, jury goes into deliberations. They spend only 6 hours, and they come back with guilty on both charges, murder and armed robbery.
When the jury said guilty, I actually teared up. I mean, it was like a huge feeling of relief. And I know what it did for the family, you know. But Patrick Cheadle's still somebody's dad.
They took my rock from me. They took my father. They took my kid's grandpa. They don't get to experience and build memories like I did with my dad. They took a son. They took a caregiver from my grandma away.
I believe that Pat Cheadle could have still been alive if we'd been able to nab Terry Durbin in my family's case.
We were told that he was the suspect in the Mongo murders, but they would not try a circumstantial case. They wanted more physical evidence that would tie him there. They just thought it wasn't a case they could try and win, is what I was told.
Whoever did it, they should pay for it. Every single day, I have to wake up knowing what happened to my family. I mean, they beat them. They beat them to where they couldn't even have an open casket. It's the violence that really bothers me the most. That's what really, really, really hurts, how they died. It's not a matter that they died, it's how. It's so hard. It's so hard.
He's the first and only person that I've registered with the prisons with that I want to know if he's released, if he escapes, that they'll personally call my cell phone and tell me. I want to know where he's at all times. He's where he needs to be. And I pray that the Andersons are able to get justice in their case.
When 37-year-old Crystal McDowell vanishes from Baytown, Texas,
everybody's looking for her.
Investigators question whether Hurricane Harvey has claimed her as one of its victims.
It's raining pretty heavy at times. The storm was affecting the Texas coast.
It wasn't just that Crystal was missing. People were dying everywhere. People were losing their homes, their cars. They were flooded out.
But when revelations about her recent divorce come to light,
Steve was exhibiting some pretty dangerous behavior, threatening.
Investigations lead towards a darker possibility.
And she did not realize the danger she was putting herself in.
He would threaten to kill the kids. He would threaten to kill himself. He would threaten to kill her.
Has Crystal's life been taken by her husband? Detectives gather evidence until a picture of a suspect emerges. Which piece of the puzzle will reveal who is guilty of murder? What would be a killer's mistake? At 7 a.m. on August 25th, 2017, CCTV captures 37-year-old Crystal McDowell heading to collect her children.
Crystal was last seen leaving her boyfriend's house in the morning.
Most everybody was in hurricane preparation mode.
Before she left, basically, the roads were not flooded.
Authorities are preparing for Hurricane Harvey soon hitting the Gulf Coast, including Crystal's home in Baytown.
A number of people had already evacuated to Dallas or Austin, different places, San Antonio, trying to get away from the coast. And so when all of this started taking place, we started getting a lot of rain just because we were on what they call the dirty side or the wet side of the storm. So we'd gotten a lot of rain.
Crystal had said she was going to collect her children, but she's never seen again.
August 26th. Crystal's been missing for a day. Her friends, her family, no one has heard from her. She's not responding to text messages. She's not responding to phone calls. People are getting really worried. Crystal's uncle calls police to report Crystal missing. But keep in mind, at this point in time, Hurricane Harvey is bearing down heavy.
Crystal's Aunt Cindy is increasingly concerned.
You go from, oh my gosh, it's been too long. She would never not return your messages. But, I had called her several times and texted her and said, hey, babe, where you at? Everybody's looking for you. And I knew that when she did not text me back, within an hour or so, there was something wrong. And that's when I started to get worried.
She was reported missing by family members.
Sheriff Brian Hawthorne's team is handed the case of the missing Crystal McDowell just as Hurricane Harvey makes landfall.
So while all this is taking place, dealing with a missing persons case. At the same time, we're trying to do everything we can to help our citizens, whether it's evacuate them from their homes using airboats or our high water vehicles, also trying to secure their homes.
During the investigation of a missing person, there's usually a lot of people involved. People are looking, searching for this particular person. However, when there's a hurricane that's actively going on, it's chaotic.
That particular area of our county got somewhere in between 55 and 60 inches of rain over, about a 72 to 48 hour period.
A lot of resources are devoted to saving the lives of the people affected by the hurricane. Emergency services are stretched very thin.
As the days went on, the bayous and the rivers continued to rise, and so we were losing more and more subdivisions to rising water.
So the manpower and the personnel used to search for someone is being depleted in other areas.
Because of the storm, that report of that missing person may not have really gotten into a detective's hands for a few days, but we immediately started working on the case the same day that she was reported. And thank goodness for the deputies and the detectives that took the initial report. They were very spot on about how they handled their business, and they crossed their T's and dotted their I's very well. I've always said the detective that makes the first call can really have a tendency to set the tone to help the investigators down the road.
Detectives begin the search by trying to confirm Crystal's last movements, the place she was due to collect her 2 children from before being reported missing. It's the home of her ex-husband, 44-year-old Stephen McDowell.
About 7 in the morning, Crystal texted Steve and said she was on her way there and asked if he had water because she may have to stay.
1 minute after 7, she sends a text message to Steve saying, "On my way to pick up the kids."
McDowell tells detectives Crystal just didn't show up.
Now, this was early in the morning, just as Hurricane Harvey began to make landfall in Texas.
Probing Crystal's movements before the hurricane, detectives zero in on the dynamics of her relationship with her ex.
Well, I think Crystal was very much a pleaser, all right? And I think she wanted the kids to grow up in as a normal relationship as could be. She was having her townhome renovated. He had asked her to just stay with him, that he would move out of the master bedroom. She could have the master bedroom if she would just stay at the house with him and the kids, which she did.
To do this separation in the best way possible that would incur the least cost of both Stephen and their child together.
It becomes clear that Stephen and Crystal's relationship has always had its own unique dynamic.
His role in the marriage was to help take care of the children because she had 2 jobs.
He was very much into his kids. He spent a lot of time with his children. And in a lot of ways, he probably spent more time with the children than Crystal did.
Could McDowell know more than he's saying? The couple's relationship becomes pivotal to the police investigation. Detectives hear how Crystal met McDowell in her mid-20s.
He was a supervisor at one of those warehouses that services the chemical factories, particularly dealing with ethylene and plastics. He was a shipping supervisor.
She had told me she had met Steve and that he was very sweet and caring and that he meant a lot to her and things may be going forward with their relationship. And I asked her basically if she thought she was in love with him, and she said, "Yes, ma'am, Aunt Cindy, I think I am." He was nice. He was very laid back. You know, she was always the wild and fun and eccentric and live life on the edge, and he always kind of let her take the front seat of everything. And I thought that was a good pair because, you know, as much as she traveled, as much as she, you know, had friends and wanted to go, he just kind of went along. I liked him. I just thought, you know, she had found her soulmate for life.
McDowell offers Crystal a shot at stability.
She did have a rough childhood. Both of her parents died early in life, during her childhood. They tell me that both of them were very recreational, potentially addicted to drugs. She was moved around and raised by a number of different people in the family. You know, fortunately for her, the family did pick up the pieces the best they could, and she was provided for by more than one person.
Crystal is my niece by marriage. She was loved by everyone. She never let anything get her down. She was always fun and rambunctious. Yeah, she was very well taken care of by her grandparents. In spite of all the bad things that had happened, she kind of found her happy place at her grandparents.
Later on, Crystal discovers a love for travel. Indeed, she found a career to match her passion for seeing new places.
I've never found a person that did not like her. Ultimately, I think that's the reason she was successful as a flight attendant, because she was very forward and friendly and had the ability to draw people into her.
She partied like young people. They went to the clubs, they went dancing, friend's house, spent time with her friends. Her family was very important. Her friends were almost like family. Like, she loved everybody as they were her family. So she basically just hung out and enjoyed her 20s.
It's during the flight attendant years that Crystal meets McDowell. They wed in 2017. But their earlier chemistry seems to disappear when they're married.
She basically, within the first year, noticed there was just a lot of signs that it just was not going to work. There was just a lot of situations that she's seen going south that she was getting concerned about. I think she just knew that they weren't compatible. He was very emotional, very needy. They started arguing a lot. Basically just growing pains of marriage, but he was so emotional that he would, throw out threats.
So she decides it's time to file for divorce.
McDowell doesn't take Crystal's request for divorce well. They'd only been married 1 year.
Stephen is somebody who doesn't take no for an answer. And even as Crystal grew distant, even as Crystal grew discontent, and no doubt talked to him about how unhappy she was and how she'd like to probably try to separate from him, he just kept coming up with reason after reason for why they had to stay together.
Friends of the family say that he was extremely emotionally manipulative. They stayed together for several years after.
They continue trying to make the marriage work. The two have 2 children together.
In 2008, McDowell and Crystal welcome a baby boy. And 2 years later, a baby girl.
He and his son were very much into gaming. They would do a lot of video games together, competing against each other and playing video games.
She was mainly staying for the children. She loved Steve as a person. She respected him as far as a dad was concerned. She never spoke ill of him. She just kind of fell out of love with him. They just kind of grew apart.
With Crystal still missing, a picture is emerging of an unhappy marriage, with Crystal coerced to staying with her husband. He has become, for investigators, suspect number 1, a man who might well know why she's disappeared.
She would say she was going to leave, but then he would threaten to kill the kids. He would threaten to kill himself. He would threaten to kill her. I mean, basically, she was torn between the whole events. I mean, she was worried about her children. She was worried about herself.
The investigation uncovers a chilling revelation. McDowell has threatened to kill his own children multiple times whenever Crystal has threatened to leave him.
She was worried about herself. She was worried about the family. She was worried about the impact of what it was going to do to the kids and what he would say to the kids.
And that's what makes it very difficult, is trying to determine what is an idle threat and what isn't an idle threat.
I think she thought of every scenario, and every time the scenarios would go back to, I only have one option, that's to stay with him and to make it work and to raise my children.
Especially during emotional times, it's very common for husbands and wives to say things to the other person just to hurt them emotionally, but not necessarily with the intent to physically harm him.
Video footage uncovered by investigators, however, paints a more complex picture of McDowell and Crystal's relationship. In 2012, he surprises Crystal with a skydiving experience.
Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday, dear Crystal! Happy birthday to you!
By this point, Crystal has become the main money earner in the family.
She had 2 jobs. She was a real estate agent and she was flying. She was an amazing realtor. Everyone loved her. She reached out to so many people, and her whole motto is that she just wanted to be a blessing to someone.
She really is the breadwinner for this family. She is really supporting the whole family.
Despite best efforts to make the marriage work, the differences between McDowell and Crystal are too great. By 2017, Crystal has had enough. If she is not simply missing, but instead has been murdered, a clear motive has emerged, one which puts her husband as potential killer.
In June of 2017, the divorce was finally final. Everyone talked about how Steve was distraught because it was actually over. When a divorce is being finalized, or during the period of time the divorce is going through, is a very dangerous time, because the desperate person that doesn't want to let go is at a point where they may try or do anything.
Once that divorce happened, that was the line he drew, that this means that things are over, that this means that I've failed at my marriage. And so I think he was happy to keep the pretenses up as long as Crystal wasn't divorced on paper. I think he knew that they didn't have much of a relationship, but the hard line he drew was when they finally divorced.
McDowell, angered by the finalization of the divorce, falls back into his old habits of making threats, lashing out. Discovering that is huge in the inquiry for detectives.
A few weeks after the divorce, Crystal called 911.
Steve threatened to kill himself and the children. And on a prior occasion, Crystal actually called police when the children didn't show up for school. And she found them with Steve, and Steve was threatening to harm himself and the children.
Later that day, he returned the children to her, and any charges or other charges were dropped.
I think Crystal was starting to see that perhaps Stephen was quite erratic, and that perhaps maybe his distress was morphing him into a person she did not recognize, and she probably started to push back a little bit and try to maintain her distance a bit, because she probably seen some signs that he was becoming increasingly unstable.
McDowell's history of threats and volatile behavior cements him as a person of interest in Crystal's disappearance. But he's not the only person police consider.
The fact that Steve had made a threat and that law enforcement had gotten involved in it obviously was one of those check marks that fills the box that makes him, a person of interest. But that's not to say that every time that happens, it automatically makes somebody a suspect, because you do see those kinds of actions are pretty common in marital separations or child custody issues. But we also had other people of interest too.
This is not a straightforward investigation. Evidence emerges of an attempt to keep things amicable for the sake of the couple's children. It seems to detectives that the couple get along too well for the disappearance of Crystal to be a certain case of spousal murder.
She was renovating her townhome. It was a townhome that they had owned together, and she got it in the divorce. And she actually helped Steve secure the home that he had. So she was part of him getting that home, and then ultimately he had room for the kids.
Crystal buys a home for McDowell and their 2 children, just a 12-minute drive from Baytown.
Crystal bought a home in Mont Belvieu is because it is a very good school district. But Mont Belvieu still has the warm and cozy kind of country feel, know your neighbor type feel. The whole idea was to get into the school district and get them set up into the home.
While Crystal's new place across town needs renovating, McDowell and the children settle into life in the new suburb. She arranges to stay with them. Again, not the picture expected of a spousal murder case. At times, it seemed that the couple were amicably separated.
You know, Crystal thought, I'll just stay there and that'll give me the opportunity to spend some time with the kids. And then that way, when I am home, I can help get them to school and, you know, get them breakfast. She wanted to be a part of their life.
It was going to make the kids happy. She was going to see the kids more often, but she also had a built-in babysitter with Steve.
I would tell her, you know, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think you need to stay there. Basically, he's not in a position where he is willing to accept you as a friend. He's thinking that, you know, you're putting this out there and that you're going to stay, and that wasn't the case. And she made it perfectly clear over and over again. You know, I care about you. I'm not in love with you. I'm here for the children.
Crystal moving back into the house was just a manipulative scenario that put Steve thinking that he had an opportunity to re-engage his relationship with her, when in fact she had no intentions, and she just did not realize the danger she was putting herself in.
Had Crystal's return been taken as a signal by Stephen McDowell that there was still a couple?
I think it just shows how removed Stephen had been from reality, that perhaps in his mind he had told himself a different narrative about what was going on with Crystal, that ultimately she was still his to win back. And it shows just how dangerous he could become.
I mean, even though they were technically divorced, I think her just staying there, playing house, even though they were sleeping in different beds, one was upstairs, one was downstairs, it got to be where he would start following her too much or calling her too much, or he would want to bring her dinner in the salon, or, you know, he started stalking her at one point. At the real estate business, he had put trackers on her car. He was accusing her of different things that was going on at work.
McDowell could not have been more wrong thinking there was a future for him with Crystal. During the time they're cohabiting and co-parenting, another man has entered Crystal's life.
She's met the local jeweler. She tells all her friends, and she goes on Facebook and she says, I have never been happier in my life.
They were only together about a month before this happened, but I think, you know, she was ready to start dating and getting out there and you know, enjoying life.
Detectives now have a new line of inquiry to consider. Was Crystal's disappearance down to former husband Stephen McDowell, or should they consider the new man in her life? They talk to a family relative.
My dad, I met a jeweler. He's really long out here. Got a good money, we got waiting, everything's been red, blah, blah, blah. Hey, people, yeah, I really think. What about him? Don't know. I mean, he's like it. You love it, but he's like here for me.
When a relative mentions feeling unsettled by Crystal's new boyfriend, detectives interview him.
Great conversation. Really concerned about the road anyway. Here's one night. He had a very on the next.
Crystal's new relationship had progressed rapidly. Within weeks of their first date, she invites him on a family holiday. It means taking McDowell's place.
The family was going on a family cruise, kids and everybody, and Steve was going to be a part of it. In fact, it's believed by us from an investigator's perspective and things that Steve has told us, that Steve intended on hoping to get remarried to Crystal on the cruise. And so, as the relationship with her new boyfriend was developing, she then realized she did not want to go on the cruise with Steve, and ultimately, she wanted to go with her new boyfriend, not her ex-husband.
To those around Crystal, it was clear she didn't want Stephen, and Stephen just wasn't getting the message. He'd even planned that the couple renew their vows on the cruise.
And I think he just had thought so much stuff up in his mind about renewing their vows and just falling back in love. I think he basically just, I would say kind of delusional about it.
I think Stephen had a very rich fantasy life in his head for a very long time. From the time when their marriage was truly not happy, but he was still pretending that there was a marriage there to salvage in the first place, to wanting to propose to Crystal on this cruise.
I think she wanted Steve to go so she would have a built-in babysitter on the cruise ship with the children, so she could enjoy her family and enjoy other people on the cruise. We don't believe, from a sheriff's office perspective, anything that the investigators found, that she was interested romantically with Steve.
At some point, she realized or thought that this may be a bad idea and uninvited Steve.
So she has to break the news to Steve that he won't be going on the cruise this time, that she's going to be taking her boyfriend.
You know, she was divorced.
Steve was devastated about being uninvited.
Could rejection be a trigger for murder? On August 24th, Crystal tells McDowell that her new relationship is blossoming.
She had come home to Steve's house, which was her home at the time, where she was staying, and he felt like she was going to stay there with him all evening. They were going to, do the whole hurricane thing as a family. They were going to shelter in place there at their home. He was out in the backyard playing with the kids. She went in and took a shower and got dressed. And prior to her leaving, he comes in the house and he finds her dressed to the nines to go out with her new boyfriend. He thought it was going to be a Steve and Crystal and the kids' evening. Instead, she left. They drove down to Clear Lake. It's a little community town south of Houston. There was a very large mall there, a nice restaurant. The storm was affecting the Texas coast.
Because Hurricane Harvey is getting stronger, Crystal decides that she'll stay the night at her new boyfriend's place.
And I think that also definitely frustrated Steve.
It's the following morning that Crystal is seen on security cameras leaving her boyfriend's house and heading back to McDowell's.
She was very smart. She wouldn't have drove her car through high water, or she wouldn't have done anything that basically would have jeopardized her or her children.
It went ashore and stalled, and then it started moving back to the east. And then once it moved back to the east, then that's when we started having the winds and the heavy rains.
It's as Aunt Cindy braces her home for the approaching hurricane that a text from her son suddenly arrives.
He was burning my phone up, and finally I answered it, and he just told me, he said, "Mom, did you know that Crystal was missing?" And I'm like, I kind of really chuckled at first. I'm like, "Crystal is not missing, son." He said, "Yes, Mom, she's missing. Like, nobody can find her." I said, "Clinton, Crystal didn't run off. She's not missing. She probably flew to Belize or somewhere to escape the storm. She's not missing." And he goes, "Mom, everybody's looking for her."
Family members soon suspect something other than the hurricane is to blame for Crystal's disappearance.
They told us that we needed to be looking at Steve.
I honestly believe Steve left her to the point of no return.
McDowell's history of threats and growing family suspicions place him back squarely in the spotlight as the prime suspect. Crystal's new boyfriend is clearly an entirely innocent party.
Well, there's no doubt that Steve is the type of person that can be very manipulative.
Steve will tell police initially that Crystal never showed up. He doesn't know where she is.
He was just saying he don't know what happened to her. She just never come in. She had sent some texts and said she was going to come get the kids and that she never showed up, and he was sticking to it.
A digital footprint reveals that McDowell tells different people different things about what has happened to Crystal. He shows a text to a male relative.
Stephen showed him another text from Crystal at about 9:30 in the morning that said, "I'm going to pick up the children and take them to Dallas." No one that knew Crystal believed that this was a text from her, because it's not something that she would do in the middle of a hurricane. Go pick up her children and take them to Dallas.
Aunt Cindy decides to stay close to McDowell to ensure the children are safe. While with him, he tells her that others are also making claims about Crystal's whereabouts.
While I was there, he had several phone calls that people called and threatened to kill her if he didn't put so much money up, like they were extorting him. I was there one day when somebody had called and basically had called and said that if you don't send me $4,000, I'm going to kill her. Well, then he started cussing and hanging up the phone, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, what are you talking about? And he says basically that, people were calling him and threatening him for money and basically saying they had her, tied to a chair and they were torturing her, and that, if he didn't have X amount of dollars within a certain amount of time that, they were going to kill her.
They were wild allegations being made just as Crystal had disappeared. McDowell's behavior was now baffling. He appeared at times to be evasive and at other times to want help.
Steve was very willing to talk to us. Steve never one time ever stopped us, denied us anything. Everything from downloading the electronic system in his car. There was all kinds of different things that we did from a forensic value that he could have stopped us, where we would have had to have gotten a search warrant. Instead, he was more than willing to sign and give consent for us to continue to investigate and dig into some of his issues that could have been protected if he'd have chosen to.
McDowell's erratic behavior, hoax calls, the involvement of other persons of interest, all makes the detective work challenging, as does Hurricane Harvey.
Normally, the search would be on in full force, but right now, Hurricane Harvey is hammering down on the region. Entire cities are just swallowed up in floodwaters, and the rain won't stop. It continues, so the waters are rising, and homes are underwater, and entire neighborhoods are flooded. And the police are doing everything they can, but a lot of these deputies and these police officers, their homes are underwater. They can't get to scenes because there's no way to get there. So a normal investigation can't happen right now. It's impossible. But police are doing everything they can to try to fit the pieces together.
Unable to search on foot for the still missing Crystal, detectives turn to local businesses, scouring surveillance footage for clues. On August 29th, a friend of Crystal McDowell calls detectives with vital information.
3 days after she's been reported missing, Crystal's car is found. A friend sees her Mercedes parked outside of a Motel 6 in Baytown. Police get to the scene, but it's odd because Crystal's car is parked outside this motel and the doors are unlocked and the keys are inside the car on the console. This is really strange. They can't even get the car out because the waters are still rising and the car is submerged, so they have to have it towed out. Now, they submit the evidence to the FBI's forensic lab, but with everything flooded, you can imagine, everything is slowed down. So this is, you can imagine trying to run through floodwaters. That's kind of the way this investigation is going. Nothing is moving quickly. Everything is just a slog trying to get this piece put together.
As they await forensic results from Crystal's car, police scour video surveillance in the area and zoom in on a face that they recognize.
There's more security footage that surfaces from a local gas station. Steve is seen dumping something into a trash can at this local gas station and leaving. Now, you would normally think, well, the investigators are going to search to see what the contents are of that trash can, but everything is underwater. Everything is washing away.
They were not able to find out what those contents were because that garbage can had been swept away by floodwaters.
2 weeks into the investigation, as Hurricane Harvey clears, crucial evidence emerges.
The evidence just continued to keep mounting, and most of it was video surveillance from business security cameras, whether it was the service station where we later found her car at a Motel 6 parking lot, and the gas station caught somebody parking the car, right? And that person that got out of the car resembled Steve.
More surveillance footage reveals Stephen riding a bike away from the motel where he has parked Crystal's car.
There was an interstate highway and a state highway where this Motel 6 was, and directly catty-corner of that was a Walmart, and we were able to get video surveillance of Steve buying a bicycle and an energy drink and a pack of cigarettes at very early in the morning, like 5:45, 6 a.m., very, very early. And then we got additional security video surveillance of him riding that bicycle down the Interstate 10 service road towards his house. It wasn't until we started putting all the video, when we discovered the car, then the video of the car being parked, and then the video of him buying the bicycle, and then the video of him riding the bicycle home. Obviously, we went back and did another search of the house and in the garage, and there was the bicycle, and we were able to identify that was the bicycle that he had purchased from the Walmart shortly after parking the car in the Motel 6 parking lot.
Suspicious movements staged to make it appear as though Crystal parked her own car, caught on surveillance video. Could this be a killer's mistake? The evidence to convict Stephen McDowell.
I would say it was very unusual to be riding your bike home in the rain, and it really wasn't on an adult bicycle either. It was a kid's bicycle.
On September the 9th, 2017, McDowell is brought in for further questioning.
And so ultimately, after multiple days of interviewing and multiple days of him coming back to the sheriff's office and being interviewed in our interview room, he ultimately broke down and told us that he would take us to the body.
Confronted by police's extensive video evidence, McDowell starts to unravel.
He finally confesses to police. He tells police that he strangled Crystal, and then he covered her face with plastic. He tied up her hands. He stuffed her body into a plastic bag, and he dumped her into a wooded area. He agrees to take them to the location where he dumped Crystal's body. It's a heavily wooded area near Needle Point Road. Police admit that without Steve's cooperation, they may never have found Crystal.
It's in my personal belief that we would not have located it if Steve hadn't taken us to it. When we finally were able to recover the body had a lot of decomposition, and there had also been some wild animal activity. All right, so very difficult to identify exactly how she died.
Believing police can't pinpoint how he killed her, McDowell adjusts his account of what has happened to Crystal.
He tried to say he squeezed her to death, as in hugging her, but we don't by any means believe that.
But he's saying it was all in just this heat of the moment passion, and I didn't intend to kill her. And in Texas, under the law, a heat of the moment sort of killing could get a defendant as little as 2 years. So that's his hope.
On June the 5th, 2019, McDowell faces court in Galveston County, accused of murdering Crystal. Her Aunt Cindy takes the stand.
We were subpoenaed, so I was sitting outside because we weren't allowed to go in. And I want to say, just seeing the bicycle roll up, seeing the dentist come in, those kind of things were like a punch in the stomach. It made it real for me. That was probably when I knew that this was a real thing. Like, there was more details. I mean, I think when you're going through the emotion of it, you know, you've got a death, you've got the murder, you've got the kids, you're overwhelmed.
McDowell pleads not guilty, forcing Crystal's family to endure the ordeal of a trial. But he doesn't anticipate the prosecution's star witness.
And that the daughter said that she saw, her father saw Steve strangling Crystal. So I just have to assume that everything that we have discussed as a prosecuting team and with the Texas Rangers and my detectives, that she obviously walked in and saw Steve strangling Crystal.
A crushing blow for McDowell. His young daughter testifies in a way which might convince a jury he intended to kill her mother.
We had initially heard that the children were both asleep upstairs when Steve killed Crystal. This little girl testifies that she actually woke up while her mommy and daddy were arguing. She'd gotten up to go to the bathroom. She heard her mommy and daddy arguing, she said. She said they were fighting about the marriage breaking up. She said they were fighting because daddy was mad because mommy was going out with this new guy.
His daughter's testimony significantly undermines McDowell's defense.
It takes 4 minutes to smother someone. I mean, at some point you would think he would have snapped and realized, what am I doing? My child's watching and my wife's dying, but of course I wasn't in his mind.
There is no heat of the moment here for Stephen. I think this is something that he contemplated for a while. I think he probably abides by the adage of, if I can't have her, no one can. There's maybe a bit of that possessiveness in there. And of course, him being out of touch with reality. And I think when he realized that the relationship was truly coming to an end and that his fantasy life could no longer make sense of what was actually happening, this was going to be the natural step he would take.
By June 12, 2019, the jury has heard the evidence. Do they believe Crystal McDowell's death was a tragic accident or murder?
But the jury isn't buying that. They've heard too much, they've seen too much. They know about his previous threats to kill the children and himself. Stephen McDowell is convicted of murder in the death of his ex-wife, Crystal. He's sentenced to 50 years in prison. The earliest he could be paroled is the year 2042.
He destroyed his children's life. I mean, he destroyed Crystal and, her dreams and her goals and her visions of, her family, and the kids will grow up without a mom. But at the end of the day, I guess the most part of my feelings go for pity. I feel bad for him that he made that choice.
Stephen McDowell was wrong to believe he could murder his ex-wife in front of his children and use a hurricane as cover.
When we were able to capture him on video, in the early morning hours, buying a bicycle, and it was very in conjunction with the time of the car was being parked, because it didn't take too long just to get an idea of how long it takes to walk from the parking lot. Those were the pieces of the puzzle that we needed.
Displaying a pattern of controlling violent behavior, being seen by his own children strangling their mother, and failing to account for surveillance cameras which proved his wife's life had not been claimed by a hurricane, had proved to be a killer's mistake.